Meijinkai.
Is this the image on the left?
The left side?
This feels like it's somewhere in the middle.
Well, something like that. In the end, the contrast and brightness at this level can really change things. So, I feel like the image I created looks kind of off. The histogram looks okay at first glance, but if the colors seem obviously wrong, check each channel's brightness and contrast. Basically, check for any extreme differences in luminance and brightness contrast. Fixing that might be one way to correct it. Lowering contrast is tricky with other commands. So the brightness and contrast command is really important when adjusting color balance. This is also something worth remembering. If you ever think maybe something's off, check the individual RGB channels, like, oh, B blue is way too bright, or G green seems weirdly bright. Adjusting the brightness and contrast might bring the colors back. This method also works on finished images, so it's a solid recovery method. It's actually pretty common for colors to go off like this, so keeping this in mind might be useful. Experienced people probably already know this. But when you're like, why do the colors look weird, or what's wrong here? Try checking for RGB shifts in the histogram, or extreme differences in brightness and contrast. For example, when we were talking about Zari earlier, this came up too. If one channel looks really dark and grainy, you might want to try noise reduction.
Yeah, exactly.
There's always a reason why colors look off. Finding that reason is one way to fix it. I wanted to explain this, especially for beginners. But in starry landscape photography, it's not that simple.
Yeah, it can get a bit complicated. If you have landscape elements in the shot, you can't just focus on the sky.
You probably know this, Aiden, since you shoot a lot of starry landscapes. For example, if there's a landscape in the shot, the histogram won't look like this.
You'll see two peaks on the left side.
Yeah, little bumps in the histogram, right? The bright parts of the landscape will affect the highlights, making it look more like a standard photograph. The histogram often looks wavy, kind of rough, like the patterns on a Japanese sword. Figuring out where to adjust it can be tricky. In that case, you might want to hide the ground and only match the stars. But in starry landscape photography, removing all color casts can make the image look unnatural. Most of the time, there's a slight green cast.
Yeah, because of the yellow light pollution.
So, where do you reduce the light pollution? How should the final image look as an artwork? That's up to the photographer's decision. For telescope prime focus or camera lens astrophotography, removing color casts and balancing toward neutral gray usually gives the best results. If it still feels off, try using the colors of the stars as a reference. And if you're still not sure, check the histogram and RGB channels. Look at the brightness and noise levels, and fix any issues you find. Adjusting like this will help you see your photos differently. I think it'll change the way you look at your own images.